Hello, today our group will be presenting on Looking Ahead with Mindsource, presented by Alyssa Duren, Maria Steffen, and Alyssa Willett, and I myself, Sarah Ash, will be leading the first several slides. For our project, we're going to be working on the AHEAD modules, which stands for Achieving Healing Through Education, Accountability, and Determination. These AHEAD modules were designed by Mindsource Brain Injury Network as a brain injury education tool for building skills and coping strategies for individuals in the justice system who have screened positive for brain injury. Due to COVID-19, the modules are now online. After conducting a needs assessment, we identified the 4 main needs and solutions, which I have created into a little graphic on this slide. So need number 1, the modules were originally intended to be used in person, not online. Therefore, our proposed solution was to create written guidelines to support facilitating AHEAD modules remotely through varying platforms. Need number 2, the AHEAD modules are being used remotely by other organizations, but are often taught by just the Mindsource staff. Therefore, our proposed solution is to inform other organizations on setting up and leading AHEAD modules online independently using their own staff. Need number 3. There is a lot of information available for teaching on remote platforms, however, it is not specialized for brain injury populations. Therefore, our proposed solution is to provide specialized knowledge of online platforms, specifically with brain injury populations for all facilitators. And lastly, our need number 4 is the inconsistent attendance and low motivation, which has been seen by the early trials of online AHEAD programs. Therefore, our proposed solution is to provide evidence-based tips to increase motivation and participation for online AHEAD module sessions. The causes of the previously identified needs, as well as the causes of needs for a program like the AHEAD modules, are due to the prevalence of brain injury in the criminal justice system, which is often underdiagnosed, so there's not really an exact number as to the high prevalence. However, brain injury in the criminal justice system, and in general, is associated with younger age at entry into custodial systems, longer periods of custody, and increased risk of repeat offenses. The prevalence of brain injury in at-risk populations creates a need for preventative services and resources. These resources, like brain injury groups, can promote fluid exchange of information with easier access and more anonymity to help a broad range of participants receive emotional and informational support. And due to the COVID-19 pandemic, it has created a need for remote implementation of brain injury resources, such as the AHEAD modules. AHEAD facilitators need written guideline recommendations and evidence-based tips to support facilitation of AHEAD modules remotely through varying platforms and settings with participants who screen positive for brain injury. These recommendations will inform organizations to independently set up and lead AHEAD modules online. Applying the proposed written recommendations will inform online platform selection for participants with brain injury. Increased knowledge of online platform use for populations with brain injury will allow facilitators to focus on increasing motivation and participation for the AHEAD modules.
Written recommendations will address the needs of the facilitators of the AHEAD modules. Factors influencing facilitator role competence are the variability and location of the facilitators and the resources available for delivery. Facilitators need information general enough to be applied to individuals or groups of brain injury survivors, but specific enough to guide the use of a remote platform technology. By writing effective written recommendations, we hope to provide flexibility for varied resources, familiarity and comfort in using remote technology, a connection to strategies for teaching about brain injury to participants with brain injury, and efficient troubleshooting guidelines to increase participation for facilitators. A facilitator's ability to translate educational content through an online platform will directly impact the performance and participation of the individuals taking part in the modules. As the facilitators review proposed recommendations and general brain injury information, they will become better equipped to present the AHEAD modules in a virtual setting. This promotes occupational justice by providing equal access opportunities to a population that is currently not receiving these services. As we provide recommendations specific to brain injury and remote learning, there will be an increase in facilitator role competence, which will increase the delivery of the remote modules, also increasing performance and participation of participants with brain injury.
Hello, this is Maria Steffen. I'll be talking about our goal and objectives. After we completed our needs assessment and found our needs and the implications of those needs, we formed our goal. Our goal was to provide evidence-based written recommendations to support facilitators in providing optimal online educational programming for group or individual participants with brain injury, including special consideration for Mindsource's AHEAD modules by December 8th. Our first objective was to interview all recommended knowledge sources to gather information by October 30th. Our second objective was to find and analyze at least 4 high-quality articles from the literature to support our recommendations by November 20th. Our third objective was to complete a first draft of our recommendations to be sent to our community partner, Karen, for feedback and edits by November 30th. And our fourth and last objective was to finalize our written recommendations and send them to Mindsource, along with some suggestions on how to measure their efficacy in the future by December 8th.
Throughout this project, we've been lucky to obtain interviews from many key informants that offer valuable information. Everybody talked about how there's not a lot of information out there about delivering brain injury education for survivors of brain injury in a remote setting. But there is one area where there has been some positive feedback in a mental health and domestic violence setting. There was remote delivery, and 71% of those participants agreed that their knowledge of brain injury increased, and 100% of the participants said that they would recommend the AHEAD modules to others with brain injury or looking to learn more about brain injury. After completing our key informant interviews, we analyzed our notes for common themes. 9 out of 9 interviews mentioned symptoms of brain injury related to learning. The most common concern in this category were the need for repetition and review at the beginning of each session, followed by cognitive fatigue related to the length of the sessions in the remote environment. So this led us to recommend breaking the modules into 2 and not delivering more than 45 minutes at a time. Another area specifically addressed were symptoms of brain injury related to emotions. Foreseeing possible challenges for facilitators in reading emotions through visual feedback, participants have their cameras off. Some were apprehensive about remote delivery because they rely on body language or nonverbal cues to gauge emotion. And some parts of the curriculum assume that participants may have support people in their life when this is not always the case. Another area of concern for module delivery was brain injury symptoms within the remote environment, like attention being a challenge for many brain injury survivors. Within a remote environment, distractions could increase, such as people, pets, noises outside or inside the module, even other participants on the screen. Participants may have difficulty finding the mute button and unknowingly cause verbal distraction. Privacy was another concern that came up with each of our interviews within the remote environment learning. Participants may not know if there are outside people listening from other participants' homes, and visual privacy into one's living space, or having minors in the house, or other privacy issues with remote delivery. Making each module, it's important to start with expectations, guidelines, and rules for how the sessions will go. And finally, technology-related changes were prominent throughout all interviews. Facilitators and participants will need to access dependable yet simple remote platforms with teaching material that is accessible visually and audibly. Participant engagement and attendance will be affected by each one's ability to communicate through the use of online platforms, using features such as the unmute button or the chat or raise hand function in Zoom.
Our interviewees, like Karen Farrington and Judy Detmer, provided us with these tip sheets that we use to guide our recommendations. So the first one is lived experience of brain injury, and that was provided to us by Karen Farrington. And this talks about how we can help them understand their role and really promote their role in the support groups, and also that it's important to provide clear, concrete directions and allow enough time for our participants or clients to process what is happening in the discussion, as well as respecting all ways of communicating on the remote platform. This tip sheet also recommends that the conversation is limited to just one person talking at a time, ideally all others muted, and then there is also just one topic at a time in order to limit confusion and increase processing. Additionally, it is important to understand brain injury, both for the facilitator to understand and for the participants to understand their own brain injury and understand the necessary accommodations that can help with this. Additionally, this tip sheet recommends that physical and mental breaks are taken regularly, and that the facilitator should prepare for grief to be experienced during these support groups. And lastly, it goes through to mention the benefits and challenges of working with people with brain injury, how there are so many benefits of working with people with lived experience, and then what challenges that the facilitator should be prepared for as well. Our next tip sheet is Cognitive Strategies for Criminal Justice Professionals, and this tip sheet goes through content such as memory deficits, delayed processing, attention deficits, inhibition deficits and impulsivity, physical and sensory motor problems, language deficits, organizational deficits, mental inflexibility, emotional dysregulation, as well as sleep. The audience for this content is threefold. So one is the professionals in the criminal justice settings, the second is professionals in community mental health settings, and the third is clients that are served in either of those settings. The authors do mention that this content is applicable to people with brain injury as well as people with substance dependence, mental illness, and other psychological stressors. So it really is relevant for a variety of participants and provides effective strategies for working with people with brain injury. And the last tip sheet talks specifically about hosting virtual meetings and mentions that it's very important to practice with the technology that you're using, as well as to provide simple and clear instructions for the people with brain injuries. Then to make sure that everyone gets to introduce themselves and get to know each other, because it is a lot more challenging to get to know each other on a virtual platform rather than the in-person platform. To utilize the mute button and chat features to set ground rules ahead of time so that everyone's on the same page, and also finally to summarize and provide closure for the participants as soon as your session is over. So these tip sheets were really helpful in informing our decisions on what to recommend for the AHEAD Mindsource modules, and we also created our own abbreviated recommendations handout, which is in a few slides, to make it easier to access during sessions. So they will be receiving in-depth recommendations that will likely have training associated with them, but it was maybe harder to pick through in the moment. So we also provided our own tip sheet handout based on the tip sheets that we have received and studied. We also explored relevant literature to inform our recommendations for our assignment. The first is Jim Well and colleagues in 2017, and that one talked about planning to need technological support, understanding a variety of platforms in order to accommodate for different preferences from the participants, as well as showing that there are multiple uses for each piece of technology. Williams talked about specific categories that influence people with brain injury, and so those would include access to the instructor, accommodations, course structure, and cognitive deficits. So it's really important to provide clear and organized deadlines and for the structure to be organized in order to promote time management in people with brain injury. And then hands-on instructors often decrease the confusion and increase the productivity of their students. Additionally, understanding their own disability creates an opportunity for self-advocacy in order for them to really receive appropriate accommodations and supports that they need. Brown and Wallerstein talk about that it's important to find familiarity in the technology that we are recommending, because it will make it easier to access the material, as well as it's important to have ongoing communication, support, and flexibility from the facilitators in order to appropriately choose what platform or technology that the participant or student will be using. And then finally, that people change, and so as people change, the platforms may also need to change with them. And all of this literature connected with person-centered approaches. So all of them talked about the common theme of considering the person, the activity, the context, and the supportive AT, and how those can all fit together. So Williams talked about understanding the specific needs of the participants. Brown and Woollersheen talked about person-centered approaches for AT recommendations from both the facilitator and the participant's point of view. And Jamwal and colleagues actually indirectly referenced the HAT model that we have discussed when they mention that it's important to consider the person, activity, context, and supportive AT, which is the definition of the HAT model. So this literature was consistent with the interviews that we conducted, as well as the tip sheets that we received, and all of them were used to inform our final recommendations for the AHEAD modules.
This is Maria here again to talk about our resources and input, as well as the next several slides. Since the AHEAD modules have been previously created through the use of grant money, and the recommendations that we made were done as part of our coursework and will be posted for free online access to organizations and individuals, there was no additional cost for this project. Our resources and input were gathered for free. Our knowledge informants graciously gave of their time and knowledge to inform our recommendations through interviews and written feedback. Our written resources included the AHEAD modules, which are posted online for free access, scholarly research articles that we found through CSU's library, tip sheets that some of our informants gave us, and online research of remote platforms that we used in our recommendations. Here you can see our logic model, a visual representation of the process that we've talked about throughout our presentation. Our resources and inputs included our knowledge source people and written resources, which I talked about in the last slide. Our activities included our objectives, which we completed in order to accomplish our goal, which was our output. Our desired outcomes included the following. For facilitators, written recommendations available to support facilitating remote programming targeting the brain injury population. Specialized knowledge included on the use of different online platforms specifically with the brain injury population, and tips to increase motivation for and participation in the online AHEAD modules. And for participants, they included increased support through effective use of an additional platform for education, and increased performance and participation in daily occupations. Our desired impacts included the following. For organizations, that other organizations would be able to independently use the AHEAD modules remotely using their own staff, and that other organizations would be able to implement remote programming in general for the brain injury population more effectively. And for the community, that there would be more ease of use of the AHEAD modules online for juvenile populations and others with brain injury in the future when needed, that there would be more effective use of online programming for the brain injury population during this pandemic, and that there would be continued use of effective online programming in the future for remote brain injury populations as needed. Finally, we'll give you a glimpse of our final recommendations for online programming targeting populations with brain injury. This slide shows the first page of our general recommendations for remote delivery of programming targeting populations with brain injury. This slide shows the first page of our AHEAD-specific recommendations, meant to inform facilitators on the best way to implement the AHEAD program online for participants with brain injury. This slide shows a handout version of some of the recommendations that we made that's a little more brief and easy to read. And lastly, this slide shows some of our suggestions for Mindsource on gathering feedback on our recommendations in the future. We would like to give a special thank you to our community member, Karen Farrington, and Mindsource, as well as to our key informants who met with us for interviews and provided us with vital resources. We really appreciate all that you've done. Here are our references. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. We look forward to talking with you more about it and answering any questions that you might have.